Putin is already afraid of his very own people, and even his inner circle wanted to sabotage him in the beginning of this year. All of this is obviously because of the lack of the progress in Ukraine, and recently, as you might already know, Ukrainians even launched their counteroffensive, retaking crucial territories in areas such as Bakhmut. And recently, Russians withdrew from some positions within the city, or how they called it, tactically retreated. And just once again, Russians started to push the peace negotiations, and this time Ukraine said that they will talk with Russia, but only on one condition. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and talk about some ridiculous Russian propaganda. And so recently, one of the representatives of the Russian State Duma, Fedot Tumusov, he suggested sending dogs to Ukrainian front lines. And he said that back in the Second World War, dogs were also helpful with demining the territories and helping the Soviet soldiers fighting against the enemy. And, I mean, no one wants to sign a military contract with Russia anymore. There is not too many volunteers and the conscription cycle does not look promising. Does it mean that Russians now have to recruit dogs? And I mean, do everything you want, but do not touch dogs. Instead, you should recruit these crazy Z-patriots who continue driving around major Russian cities carrying intercontinental ballistic missiles which are destined for Washington. Yes, they still keep doing it. Because I personally think this will be a very great opportunity for them to prove their loyalty and allegiance to Putin. And if you also agree with this, that better send them rather than dogs, can you please like this video and subscribe to my channel to see how many of us think the same. You can also follow me on Instagram because I'm planning to travel around Europe, and who knows, I might even meet some of you guys. The link to my Instagram is down below. And now let me give you a very quick update from the south and the east of Ukraine and the tactical retreat of Russians from Bakhmut, and then we'll talk about Putin's problems with his inner circle. And first of all, this last night, a civilian infrastructure has been severely damaged in Mykolaiv by Russian missiles. And one of the places affected was the grocery store. But once again, according to Russian propaganda, their target was the ammunition warehouse and the maintenance and repair store for military vehicles. I mean, it does not look like this to me at all. Next we have the report by the Institute for the Study of War, which claims that Russians now started to panic whether they'll be able to maintain their defense positions in Kherson region across Dnipro River. And as we go all the way to the north, recently allegedly the very first attempt of Ukrainians attacking the Russian territory happened, and basically they brought a tank to this Budarki settlement and they attacked the Russian positions across the border. The information still requires verification. As we get closer to the east, according to once again report by the Institute for the Study of War, Russians continued to resume their offensive along Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna front line, but they were completely unsuccessful. And then right here is the video of a self-propelled German howitzer PZH-2000, which Ukrainians use in their eastern front lines. And as always, hundreds of extra footage that does not make into my daily episodes will be available on my Patreon. The link is down below and there's still 1 week of free access. Next we go to the hottest point in the entire Ukraine, the city of Bakhmut, and recently Ukrainians were able to do a small successful localized counteroffensive to the south of Ivanovsk. And speaking about Bakhmut itself, according to Serhiy Cherivatay, Ukrainians were able to reclaim another 500 meters across Bakhmut front lines. And throughout the process, they were able to eliminate 103 Russian soldiers, injure 157 of them, destroy 1 infantry combat fighting vehicle, 7 drones and 6 howitzers. And at the same time, according to the general of Ukrainian army Alexander Syrsky, Russians and Wagner started to realize that Ukrainians started to seize the advantage inside Bakhmut and that Russians are slowly being trapped. We then even have a very interesting statement from the head of Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin, about whenever he was asked whether the Minister of Defense of Russia accepted his invitation to be inside Bakhmut. And Prigozhin said, well, he is inside Bakhmut. I thought this was a very known common story. But later on, Yevgeny Prigozhin made a remark that he was not talking about the current Minister of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, he was talking about the future one. And who is this guy or a woman is not yet known. And all this is just yet another confirmation about the ongoing confrontations between Prigozhin and the Ministry of Defense of Russia, and recently these arguments started to become even more heated. And this is just the tip of the iceberg about Putin's problems with his own people and his inner circle. And first of all, these are obviously just the regular people who become more and more aware of what's happening in Ukraine and are getting angrier and angrier with Putin about the lack of success. I mean, in the very beginning he was promising a swift victory over Ukrainians, and now more than 1 year later, Ukrainians are actually counterattacking and Russians cannot do anything else. At the same time, the losses of the Russian army crossed 200,000 people recently, which means that now more and more families are getting directly affected by this war. And because of this, Putin is getting more and more afraid that some of these people can do something to his rule. Because of this, it gets pretty obvious that Putin is trying to clinch to at least even the smallest victory, so he can present it to the people of Russia and at least lower this tension. And that is the perfect description why Russians want to capture Bakhmut so much. At this point, Putin understands that he messed up severely by invading Ukraine, and now there is literally no right solution for him, so he is stuck in this loophole. The second group of people who is getting frustrated with Putin are just the regular Russian soldiers and conscripts, and this is mainly because they're getting constantly lied and deceived. For example, some of them are promised that they will not be sent into Ukraine whenever they're recruited to the so-called military training camps, just for them to end up on the actual Ukrainian front lines. And obviously, whenever you're literally forced to fight somebody else's war and even risk your own life, you do not like this person who made you do it at all. And so no wonder the desertion cases among Russian soldiers skyrocketed recently, and some other people, they just prefer to join the resistant groups, such as the Freedom of Russia Legion. And then, ultimately, the third group is the Putin's inner circle itself. But these are the people who can already actually physically sabotage him, betray him, and turn things around, if they want to. It all started back with the Russian oligarchs, because the only two things they care about is money and power, and Putin took it both by invading Ukraine. And so no wonder recently we started receiving more and more intercepted phone conversation between Russian oligarchs, which are saying that Russia is doomed, they need to run away, Putin is doing something unthinkable, and we have to stop him. But wait, there is more, because then it goes as deep as within Putin's own inner circle. Specifically who we are talking about is Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the General Staff of Russia, and even Nikolai Patrushev, the secretary of the Russian Security Council. And according to Pentagon's leaked documents, which we talked about last month, these were exactly these two people who wanted to actually physically sabotage and betray Putin. And in very basic understanding, what they wanted to do is that whenever Russia wanted to plan its own offensive in the south of Ukraine, Valery Gerasimov said, no, let's not do this. Ukrainian army at that moment was superior to ours, so let's switch to defensive and maybe launch some localized offensive in some particular areas. And the main goal here was to not attack Ukrainians, where most likely they might be vulnerable, but instead attack in the places which are heavily protected by Ukrainians, such as for example in the Zaporozhye region. And if you remember from some of my previous episodes in the past, Russians were literally sometimes obliterated in such battles, losing hundreds of tanks at once, which kinda confirms this assumption that maybe this was a sabotage by Valery Gerasimov. Because the ultimate objective of these activities was to allegedly blame Putin once again for the invasion and say that it is impossible to perform any military tactics, because Russian army is completely unable to do anything. And according to their hopes, it will show Putin that this war is completely meaningless and pretty much impossible, which will hopefully force him to negotiate. And because of all this, no wonder the pressure from the Russian side to restart the negotiations resumed once again. But they still kinda want to do a win-win situation for themselves. That is why, according to the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Alexei Danilov, Ukrainians are receiving such requests from Russian side to resume these talks, but Russians are trying to push once again their own favorable conditions. In response to that, Alexei Danilov said that Ukraine will talk, but only on the conditions obviously favorable to Ukrainians, and then according to another representative of Ukrainian authorities, Dmitry Kuleba, he said that Ukraine is ready to talk about peace with Russia as long as this peace does not involve freezing this conflict. This war must be over once and for all, he says. But to be honest, I think it was perfectly said by the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Oleksiy Reznikov, who said that Ukraine will talk with Russia, but only on one condition, and that this condition is that Russia must have the next president. So just please let me know in the comments if you think Ukraine should accept these peace talks in favor of the greater good and peace around the world. I was also able to find this 40+ minutes documentary about the Russian army crimes in Ukraine, and it does have English subtitles. And as always, I uploaded it completely for free to my Patreon, but if you decide to join this platform, please know that this is one of the best ways to support my channel. You can also become my channel member, unlock exclusive channel badges and emojis, or simply use a PayPal link. Everything will be found to the right and down below. Thank you so much for your attention, товарищи, and see you tomorrow.